The Construct Cast is made possible by viewers like you. Please visit us at commutationconstruct.locals.com. Memberships are free to start with coupon code CCFREE. Hello and welcome to part 3 of the Rise and Fall of Empire series. My name is James Darien. I am the host. This is the Construct Cast, and yeah, let's just get right into this a little bit. So we have discussed just recently what really can cause an empire to fall. We've reviewed John Glubb's work and seen that certain trends tend to follow recurringly throughout history the nations that collapse, the empires that collapse. I shouldn't say nations. The nations, at least in some cases, tend to outlive their collapse unless they get conquered. So, looking at that, we can also consider a bit of the beginning factors and some of the things that cause the collapse. One important factor to me about this that I was able to recognize was immigration becomes almost inevitable once the country begins to make wealth, but at the same time that immigration forms cracks in that society. So, for my first controversial addendum to the Rise and Fall of Empire series, I want to consider how to tackle immigration, because it seems to me that in order to elongate the life of an empire, you not only, one, you need a unified culture, but two, you need skin in the game. Essentially, you need everyone and their generations that follow to feel like we all fought for this. Not just that we made a living here, not just that we've done well, but that we have shed blood for this. That seems like an essential part to the foundation of empires. So, why can I not say this word? Conscription. Should forced military service be a thing for immigrants? This is a curious question, because the idea is, for one, you want to ensure that stability and cultural unity is as glued together and as strong as possible. You want to make sure there are as few cracks, like pretty much any different subcultures will have between each other. You want to try to mitigate that and minimize it. For sure, you want to minimize it. Even if it can give you a diversity of perspectives, at the same time, it breaks things down. There eventually perspectives become too diverse, and there is a no return point for empires where they just cannot manage it all, because the simple fact is you can't please everyone. So that seems to be one aspect of it. And on the other side, you have the aspect of the stages of an empire. It seems to me that the early stages are considered the growing part of an empire, and it almost seems like a necessity to either elongate, promote, or revitalize those stages. So if you can somehow use conscription to artificially recreate another outburst. If you could manipulate the workings of, if you could manipulate the functional workings of the society to follow a trend that maintains the moral integrity of the outburst, pioneering, and the conquest period, the focus on pride, honor, and strength in your nation, that sense of nationalism, that seems like it would be vital to the elongation of your empire. Because if your empire loses the moral foundations that brought it together in the first place, if it loses that cohesion, then it's going to grow weak. If it loses that, then people may start to sell out your empire. They won't be thinking of their communities. They won't be thinking of their politics and their fellow man within their empire. They'll be all thinking about who knows what. That seems to be a major problem with the empires, and it doesn't seem to get terrible until the decadence period, possibly a bit during the intellectual period, because that's where people have basically, during the intellectual period is when people essentially give up on their moral systems, or the traditional morals entirely. They begin to replace the original moral system during the affluence period, wherein the people have so much wealth they don't feel like they want to sacrifice, so they create a new moral system wherein they don't need to sacrifice. So you need to create it seems almost essential to create a system wherein sacrifice is continually rewarded. Sacrifice is continually seen as honorable and virtuous. I would say that that's probably one of the more vital parts to keeping an empire relevant, and keeping the lifeblood of the empire, the people of the empire, on the side of the empire. Now, there is the question of how to do this throughout the generations. How do you do this with every generation? Do you want to have forced conscription for all citizens or just the new people? I think to some extent all citizens would be good, but it definitely seems like there should be a stronger push for that with immigrants, as going through the sacrifice of serving the country seems to be vital to the union of culture. So it's almost like immigrants have some catching up to do with the people whose families have been here for 10 generations. So they already have that in almost in their blood. They have that attachment. But when you're newer, you don't have that attachment at all. So you got to try to catch up a little bit. Kind of like going through a tutor course when you're behind on a class. So you're taking a class and a tutor. In this case, you're just doing a longer period of military service. So that is one idea I've been pushing around. The other idea is, and this is one that people probably aren't going to like, is maintaining the conquest period or revitalizing it. And so this is interesting because the U.S. somewhat does this, or did this. So the U.S. was initially just the 13 states. Of course, over time we worked up our way, going across the continental U.S. up to 48, but then eventually we got 49 and 50 with Alaska and Hawaii. And that kind of is a way that the U.S., by continuously adding more lands, is able to almost maintain that identity of conquest and commerce following it, and sort of bringing in new parts to the union, kind of building that nationalist spirit where it's like, oh yeah, we did this together, we accomplished this together, we're growing. It's not just this one thing that's happening. It's like, oh, we as a nation are growing. So again, it's all about fulfilling this need for nationalism in order to maintain an empire, which it's funny because you go too far on the nationalism scale, and you can get to horrible atrocities from like what they say with like the fascists, Nazis, and all of that. But on the other hand, it's also there is an essential component of it to society. Intellectuals will disagree with this, typically, especially the more philosophical ones, who lean into more socialistic ideals or try to break away from the need to sacrifice. People who don't want sacrifice, they don't want nationalism, typically. That is what I've seen. And they see sacrifice as foolish and unnecessary for many reasons. But but this is here, let me move my notes up here a little bit. But this is this is, to me, based on my research, seemingly essential to the longevity of nations. And this is why I said I want to go through the beginning part of Glubb's work more so in this episode than the last one, because the idea is when you enter before you go from the commerce period to the affluent period, you're reaching noon in the life of your nation. And affluent onwards, you're heading towards sunset. You're going back down the hill. The idea is to keep going up the hill. And there definitely is a limit to moving up the hill because there's only so much land. There's only so much area. There is a limit to growth. Sort of. Well, not sort of. There is. The question is, what is it? Because there is limited land. There is a limit to the amount of material in this world, which means there's only so much food we can make. There's only so many places we can live. There's only so many things we can build. Though, with the ability to expand to space colonization, these limits can be largely removed. Maybe not fully, but unless we create machines that can transform the atomic structure of anything thrown into it into other types of atomic structure. So basically, you can make water out of rocks. Unless we invent something like that, which, hey, maybe we will one day, will likely be a limit, or at least a need to expand farther to expand the limit. Like maybe we go to Mars and there's not enough water there, but maybe there's water on the moon and on asteroids, and we can go to these asteroids, or we can create like some kind of asteroid fishing system to like pull the asteroids so they crash on Mars in like secure places, and then we can mine the asteroids for stuff. Though for the asteroids to be sizable enough to do that would probably be rather devastating to crash into a planet. But something like that. Maybe you can make them. You could fish them in and have them end up circling the planet like a moon. Stuff like that, or just like get them to go on I'm using the fishing metaphor because I think it's the best way to describe it. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself too much with this, but use some kind of a way to get the asteroids to orbit the sun closer to our orbit without overlapping it, or maybe the orbit of like between the Earth and Mars, and we could create a system that could keep it within that orbit so it doesn't like flip out and hit one of the planets. That would be cool. That'd be cool. I don't know if it's scientifically possible, but there's so many advancements that to the modern eye would seem absolutely impossible. So who knows what it'll be in 100 years? Who knows? But so that is a way where we could technically grow indefinitely. In general, indefinite growth is likely impossible. So what do you do when you reach a cap? This is the other side, because we want to figure out how do we get to the cap? That's to say, how do we elongate as much as we can before reaching a cap? And then what do we do once we reach it? So I think utilizing techniques to revitalize an outburst or conquest period, I do think having conscription would work towards this. But again, there is an issue with that regarding individual rights. So we have to really consider how we would want to approach this. Like, would it just be highly recommended? Would it be an absolute? Maybe that's why I think you can't really do it with citizens. If you want to do it with immigrants and say, okay, you can become a citizen with full rights, but you have to go through this. I don't see that as a bad thing, because it does help keep out bad faith actors. It does create a culture, and once your family is in, once you have gone through all the trials and made it in, you are one of us. That's really the goal. That is the goal of it. So let me look at this for a moment. I apologize for the delay. So there is also an aspect of traditionalist values that seems to be very important. Now, well, this actually basically goes straight off of the last thing. So with traditionalist values, basically nations tend to be founded by one people for one purpose, or not necessarily for one purpose, but one people with a united concept of what they want. In the U.S., that was liberty. In the U.S., we wanted liberty, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That's basically what we wanted. And our people the people of the U.S. founding came together for that. We can say our people. Though I don't believe that they would consider me one of their people, because I am not of British descent. I don't think. Maybe like 8%. I don't know. A quarter of a quarter of a quarter. No, a quarter of a quarter. I guess that'd be. But yeah, so with that in mind, it seems to be that the dissolution of traditionalist values always come towards the latter half of an empire. And I was talking with a friend about this, and the main thing that we were debating was whether or not these, you can call them progressive values, whether or not these progressive values, and I hate that term, because I don't think progressive to me just means you're pushing for change, but or you're being activistic. But for the layman's terms, for what you guys would say, progressive values, basically more Um, I don't like using the word liberal for, because I don't think that's really right either. But just uh, whatever. We'll just go with this. So the more progressive, more left values um, tend to occur within the decline of empires. And we were debating whether or not that was an just a correlation that just happened to be there, or whether or not there was any kind of a causal relationship. So, assuming there is a causal relationship, then I want to get my words right here. So, assuming there is a causal relationship between the progressiveness of ideas and values and the dissolution of traditionalist values, if that is directly part of causing the breakdown of empires, then there needs to be a reinforcement of traditional values. There needs to be, and again, I've talked about the sense of nationalism, but not beyond nationalism. It needs to be cultural. Well, nationalism is cultural, but the cultural, like, day-to-day lives of people needs to maintain almost a traditional sense about itself. That may be a necessity, because it seems to me that perhaps men and women don't work well together. Like, in certain circumstances, yeah, but in other circumstances, maybe no, because we do have all these cases where when women enter workforces that are normally masculine, there tend to be rape accusations, there tends to be harassment, there tends to be women feeling uncomfortable in the workplace because of the way the guys talk to each other. Those things do happen. So if that's the case, then maybe creating a situation wherein that experience can happen is not good, and maybe it would actually be better to maintain the more segregated traditional values, which, again, that's if we could determine a causal effect. I don't know if we could. I'm not sure if I would recommend trying to progress in that way, because, and see, now I'm using progressive in the way I like to use it. I'm not sure if it would be good to progress towards a system that disallows that type of stuff. One, because it would not be socially accepted. It definitely would not be. And I don't think it would have been for, at least among half the population, I don't think it would have been for the past almost 100 years. Maybe even more. But so that's one that is one kind of curious way of looking at it. The other is, if we look at it as just a correlation where the sexualized music and loss of morals around sex and the women workplace, shorter work weeks. Shorter work weeks tend to be due to economic decline, though perhaps not necessarily. It says it's because of economic decline or a loss of economic growth, but I don't think that would necessarily be accurate. It could potentially be that there is so much excess economic growth that they're just like, yeah, we actually are making enough that we don't need to work those 7 days because we're already doing so well. That's kind of a give or take, like, isn't it type of thing from my standpoint. Glubb seemed fairly sure that it was because of economic decline that this happened. I'm not sure. That's the point of the story. I am not sure. And I do know that tribal societies, before even the agricultural revolution, they tended to work like maybe 20-hour weeks when they were hunters and gatherers. So Do you need do you need a a super long work week to maintain society? I don't know. I would argue on the side of no. I would lean on the side of no. Probably. Probably. I would give it like an 85% chance no. So, disregarding and if that's the case, maybe we can disregard the stuff about the sexuality of women. In which case, how do we embrace this stuff in a way where it won't be a contributing factor, if it might be one, or what can we do? I guess if it's just correlated and not causal in any way, then you don't really need to do anything. But I think it does. I think it is causal in the extent that it exacerbates problems. So what can we do to mitigate the problem exacerbation? I think, gosh, I'm probably going to get in so much trouble for this whole thing, but I think if we look, I think if we look at where there are problems and where it causes the tension to build, then eliminating that would be a thing, would be beneficial. So if women end up feeling uncomfortable in workplaces around men, rather than making new rules for the men to follow, it may be better off if we just segregate the workplaces so that the men and women never have to work together if they are incapable of doing so. That may actually be a better result, because the thing is, when you make more rules on people, that is directly taking away liberties. And sure, you're in a workplace, like you signed a contract, but even still, like you're making people have to restrict the way they behave. And I find, and at least from what I can tell, people tend to not like to have to hold themselves back. When they do, it tends to be from fear of repercussions, and it can build resentment. That is one thing that seems that's one thing that I've tended to recognize. So if that is what is happening through all of these rules and new trainings that are being needed, because everyone needs to go through sexual harassment training now, everyone needs to go through all of these yada 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 trainings to compensate for this, as opposed to trying to reforge the people to fit the changing society, perhaps we should just change the society to meet the people. So if women are wanting to enter the workplace, then their workplace should be different from men, because men and women tend to be different. That might be one of the necessary results. That may be one of the necessary middle grounds, you could say, that would help elongate an empire. If there, again, it's hard for me to, well, if there is no causal relationship, you don't need to do anything. But so this is all assuming there's a causal relationship between the decline and the events around it. I believe there probably is a causal relationship, because the breakdown of society seems to be very culturally based. It seems to be about the people, one, not feeling nationalistic, so they don't feel attachment to their country. Two, they don't feel attachment to their people. The culturally based. There is no attachment to their fellow man within their country. Am I gonna need to make a part 4 on this, on how to not fall into despotism? I might need to. We will discuss that later. But for now, we're just doing the 3 parts. But so let's see. So considering the rising arc of the empire, we need to kind of find a way to maintain the commerce age without falling into the affluence age. That seems to be a big part of it too. And this seems difficult because commerce naturally leads into affluence, because affluence is just you've built your wealth. Essentially, you've built your wealth and the next generation has grown up with that wealth. So how do you maintain the commerce stage that holds on to at least some of the, because so commerce tends to abandon some of the values of the conquest already, the conquest and pioneering ages by default. So the commerce stage doesn't have as much of a nationalist drive behind it, and they tend to I mean, they're focused on money. Let's be real. They're very much focused on money, but there can be a focus on growing the nation before the money. There can be a focus on I want to do something for my community before I'm thinking of myself. So how do we propagate this across generations? Because it seems very difficult to not basically make a ton of money and then have your kids be raised with money and therefore just value money before God, money before nation, money before people. How do we avoid this? Well, for one thing, we could say education, though on the other hand, there is the trouble of national education, wherein you're taking away the power from the parents to raise their kids if you do a national education. At the same time, you can have the education be focused on the virtues of the nation, of the virtues of the culture, and of the moral philosophy that should be followed. You can have the education be harsh, have it be strong, and hold on, I don't want. Hold on. Sorry about that. Where was I? You want the nation to hold on to its value of, hold on to its value of, what am I looking for? Also, I'm sorry if that was really loud. Yeah, the values of nationalism, all those virtues and everything that the previous generations have. You want to carry that forward into this generation. So, looking at a forward-seeking path for that, education could be an answer. Could. The problem with that is, again, it's being controlled by the government, and the government by nature has the people's disinterest at heart. Which, that sounds kind of weird to say, because it's like, wait, but it's a nation by the people for the people, right? At least in our system, and in most systems, like, the nation wants the country to do well. They want them to survive. So why is this bad? Why should nations not have the education? Well, the problem is that in order to retain power, leaders will want to make the next generation more obedient to them. They're not going to. So building up the nationalism, they'd probably be fine with that, but it would be in the interest of the leaders to make the education system designed in a way where the children they raise feel the need to rely on the national system, on the government. And in that case, your growth period isn't going to happen, because you're making people who are you're raising people who are trained to be takers and not givers. That's part of the problem that can create. On the other hand, if that doesn't happen, it could be one of the most effective ways to maintain a system of moral virtues throughout generations. So it's a complicated question, and you don't want to take away the rights of the parents to train and raise their own kids, how they see fit. So a way we can consider this is we can consider how to approach parenthood culturally. So I don't know if the government could do this, but you could make a cultural system wherein the youth are raised to act a certain way, wherein parents are almost part of the parents' virtues is to raise their kids in a very specific way to maintain their virtues. You would probably need a system to train parents to do this, though. So again, I as a more liberty-minded person, it's really hard for me to say that there's a good way to do this. And I don't know that there's not a way that would not be considered just brainwashing propaganda type of stuff. So it's a very difficult question. It really is a difficult question, because once you start dealing with multiple generations, once you start dealing across generational lines, there becomes the influence of parents and child, and the influence that government will have on everyone. So this is an issue, and it's a complicated one to really resolve. I mean, no empire really has resolved it up till now throughout all of human history. We're going to need to resolve it ourselves. And not only are we going to need to resolve it, but we're going to need to undo a lot of damage that's been done up to this point, because we are at a point in our society in the US where we already have very segregated cultures, not lawfully segregated, but independently chosen segregated cultures. May not fully independent, but for the most part, independently segregated cultures. For the most part, we have segregated classes by wealth, again, by people, and that goes into where people choose to live. So there is an issue of how do you avoid the self-segregation? How do you avoid, do you want to avoid the self-segregation? Probably, Glub was talking about how the self-segregation creates enclaves, and enclaves being separate from other enclaves means there are huge cracks between them, and it's a setup for societies to fall. So it makes you wonder also, on one hand, if the only way to maintain a nation would be for everyone to be the same color always. So therefore, almost, I'm not going to say you should force interracial matching or intercultural mating, but it seems like that may be one of the only ways to kind of cross that line generationally. It seems so that way the culture is always uniform. More or less uniform. So that's one. That's one way to look at it. But again, that would take multiple generations and a lot of eugenics to do. And I don't think anyone would really approve of that. And I am not saying that I am for that. I am just pointing that out. I am just pointing this out as like, well, there's the problem. What's the answer? Or what are possible solutions? So it seems that segregation not good, not good. At the same time, um, I don't know how breaking down the segregation would work, because it might end up being like women in the workplace, where they need all these new rules, and then it ends up creating discomfort by desegregating. And maybe a generation or a little bit of time with continued interaction, if you can if a nation can survive long enough, that no longer matters. Maybe just over time, if the empire does not fall during that time, the issue will go away, but it might just become unspoken. That's the other side of this. It might just become unspoken, and I feel like that's pretty much why we have the riots after what happened with George Floyd, because a lot of people felt like police brutality against blacks went unspoken, and they and seeing that just made everyone sick of it. Seeing that just made everyone sick of it. So, I mean, the answer is I'm unsure. To be blatantly honest, I am very unsure of how to elongate the prosper parts of a nation, how to maintain the flourishing aspect of the nation. But I do think there are some things we can do. I mean, this. So there's the idea that inflation can make it easier to move money around, and therefore people can build more wealth. However, people need to continuously build wealth in order to maintain that wealth. Conversely, money doesn't move as easily in a deflationary standpoint, but having a deflationary currency may be one way to maintain the commerce phase of a nation. Because if your currency is totally deflationary, if you have a fixed currency, not even one where like the government can continue to just print more, or they can dilute, or it's made with like precious minerals and the government can dilute it, and maybe they can make it stronger and its value changes. You don't want that kind of flexibility, the government have that kind of flexibility with your currency. But if it's something like Bitcoin, where Bitcoins will always be the same thing essentially, but there is a hard cap on the number that will ever be out there. Like, the ways to use Bitcoin changes, but like in general, a Bitcoin is a Bitcoin. It's these numbers types of things, and it's all these bits and bytes put together. It's a long string of numbers, and there's a finite amount that will ever be made. Creates a deflationary currency, a permanently deflationary currency. If a government was to adopt a system of that nature for their currency, you could create a system in which the currency is always being valued more and more, and in which case wealth would be able to continue to exist more and more, and intergenerational wealth could grow up. You have to eliminate estate tax, which I think that's actually very important, because people are just like, oh yeah, estate tax is for the rich. No. Most people who are wealthy, who are super wealthy, they can give their kids the connections that they need to achieve at least a suitable level of wealth. At least. Like, it becomes so much easier just because the kids, they don't need to wait for inheritance. One, the parents can give them money throughout their lives, and two, the kids can be trained and they can be introduced into all the connections that they need to retain wealth over generations. Now, typically, that only lasts for like 2 or 3 generations, but it is something that can be achieved. It is something that can definitely be achieved. Very American dream, but excuse me. But the estate taxes definitely affect people who aren't quite there. People who run small businesses and they want to pass on the business to their kids when they die, and suddenly that kid has to pay like half the net worth of the business in tax, and they have to close down the business, or homes or something like that. Like, you inherit a home, that is your inheritance, and suddenly you have to sell the home because you owe a tax for half the value of the home, or something like that, like, or whatever the estate tax rate is. So making sure that wealth can be built over generations, I think, is very important. You want to ensure that's possible. You want to ensure that people can feel like they're able to rise up. And I believe that a deflationary currency, though it would slow down the exchange of currency, it would not hinder people's ability to grow with it, because the currency they get will be able to grow by itself. So that's a bit of a tangent, but I feel, to me, I feel like that could help with maintain a commerce phase. Even when Glubb was talking about the U.S. hitting its sunset, entering into its affluence period, he said that it was when Woodrow Wilson became president. One of the first things, I think it was one of the first things Woodrow Wilson did in the first few years he was president was he established the Federal Reserve, which is a private bank, by the way. It's not actually government owned. It just has a name that makes it sound that way. He established the Federal Reserve as the only way the U.S. could print it, the central bank of the U.S. and the central debtor for our money that we print. And he created a system in which we switched over to a deflationary currency. So if that is seen possibly as one of the triggers of the sunset era, of one of the triggers of the affluence era, where the wealth is built, now we're trying to like spread it around and just make it move as quickly as possible to kind of like make up for the fact that we're actually getting poor, or our money is growing less valuable. I think that would be one way to kind of approach the idea of elongating an empire. So we've talked about quite a few things. I think the biggest thing is trying to institute that feeling of nationalism and maintaining the culture, trying to overcome the hurdles of the intellectual era, the age of intellectualism, and the age of affluence, because those both lead to the age of decadence, where we reach a political point where we reach a point where intellectuals are battling everything out, and it drives party divides, and people become pessimistic, and then governments start to essentially abuse their people in order to and villainizing each other in order to drive their own wants. It seems that we are in that stage now. So the fall of an empire can be caused by an outburst. So it could be that simply creating another renewal could recreate the empire. Not necessarily that you need to destroy the documentation that founded it or the principles that founded it, but there could be a point where you just need to essentially cut off the head, fire all the leaders, destroy the partisanship, and essentially bring together a think tank to establish new parties, or for whatever kind of leadership system you have. That might be a necessity. I'm not sure. Is it like, would it be better to be a phoenix where you die and revive and all in one go, and then you just go through an endless cycle of that? Or would it be better to try to really try to just conquer the code to immortality, so to speak, and overcome all of these vices and problems that get in the way? It seems to me that virtue and morality is essential to the longevity of nations, the longevity of empires. So I think finding a way to make that rise again seems important. In Glubb's work, he says that he remarked how some of the greatest saints of all time came out of the decadence era of governments. If there could be a way to platform those moral voices and have them lead a new generation that essentially recycles us into one of the earlier stages without necessarily giving up what we've had, that could be... I don't know if I can say that would be an answer, but I think that would resolve the issue. And I'm saying I don't think that could be an answer because I don't think you can plan for that. And that's the thing. An empire wants to be able to plan to be able to maintain its longevity. But you can't plan for, like, I don't know, a Jordan Peterson. You can't plan for someone who just comes in and teaches moral and ethical values to kids, to an entire generation. And even if you get that, it may not affect enough people. Maybe someone like Jordan Peterson could create that. Maybe you could create an organization that is designed around this, that is designed around motivating young people in this way. But again, to retain liberty while wanting to promote this, I cannot personally say that there is a way to accomplish this that will not, to fully accomplish this, that will not strike on personal needs, and on personal liberty. So anyhow, I am really curious what you guys think. I believe that there is a lot that we can do here. And again, I know I harped on the women thing again, but that's just because it's so fascinating to me. It really is fascinating to me. And I think there's also like the rock music aspect. Like, do nations need to make music that promotes immorality illegal? Well, where's your freedom of speech if you do that? But then again, the U.S. did used to have obscenity laws, even though we have our concept of free speech. So what is free speech in that case? If you can make obscenities illegal, Can you justify that in a society that tries to platform all ideas? I don't think so. But at the same time, might it be necessary to, in order to in order to in order to elongate in order to promote the longevity, in order to promote the ability for that freedom to last eternally? Is that type of thing a necessity? Then again, they don't exist here anymore because we had the freedom to debate it. So, it's a very complicated issue. I really hope you guys comment and let me know what your thoughts are. I could probably go for multiple hours on this, and I could probably go for multiple hours on this. I'm not going to do that right now. We will have some follow-up discussions, and I will see what I can do for you guys. All right? I will see what I can do for you guys. Anyhow, this has been James Darian. Remember, like, subscribe. You thought I was going to say see ya. Nope. Like, subscribe, and follow me at commutationconstruct.locals.com. I will see you guys later. Have a good one. Have a good one.